Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, a quick question for everyone listening today, or wherever you are in the world. I want to ask you a question around education in enterprise digital transformation. When should you educate an enterprise? What does and should education cover when undergoing a digital transformation? Yes, I appreciate that was more than one question, but I'll throw another one in as well. What have many CDOs failed to educate on when carrying out a digital transformation? Well, Lauren Hawker Zafer, the head of training and education at Squirro Artificial Intelligence, is going to join me on the podcast today. And Squirro marries data from any source with your intent and context to intelligently augment decision making right when you need it. But today I want to talk about education in enterprise digital transformation and also explore financial institutions. And by that I mean things like data and cognitive search. So we got a lot to talk about today. So I don't want to reveal too much, so buckle up and hold on tight because it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to Switzerland, where Lauren is waiting to join the show today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, Neil. It's great to be on the show. A real pleasure. I'm glad that you've asked me to participate today. So my name's Lauren Hawker Zafer. I'm currently in Zurich, originally from Scotland. I work at Squirtle. So Squirtle is a Zurich-based tech organisation. I can tell you a little bit more about Squirtle in a minute. And at Squirtle, I lead the educational and training efforts. So I'm the head of training and education and like to ensure that our community has adequate opportunities to educate themselves on what it is that we're motioning here at Squirtle and also what we're motioning in the field of tech and the emerging tech ecosystem in particular, Neil.
Fantastic. And before we find out more about Squirro, there's a lot to unpack there. You're currently in Zurich, you're from Scotland originally. So if I was to take you back in time, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, how that and education would collide, or ultimately, what's your origin story?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very interesting. And I think I ponder on that quite a lot myself. As we've understood, I'm originally from Scotland. I was born in quite a small town in Dumfries. And I think there was an immediate interest from a childhood age in technology. It wasn't that I was attached to a computer or any sort of traditional format that we might imagine when we say we've got an affiliation with tech, especially at a younger age. But I think it was more a sort of curiosity that was developed by my environment. So my mother was quite adamant that we take an interest in how technology works. So simple things like maybe how to fix the video recorder, looking at where indexes were in TVs back then when we were talking about sort of early 90s. So she did try and maybe usher more of a self-identification with tech. And I think that it's always really been laced or intertwined in part of my own professional path. So if I look back and going through the various roles that I've embodied, so I've been a teacher at an earlier stage of my professional career. I was very fascinated about the technical opportunities that were on offer in the early 2000s and how this could empower a lot of the teaching staff that I led at that time. So I was responsible for a lot of technical innovations in the classroom per se. I also think that it was later on when I moved into content development. I worked for the EdTech department, and we spent a lot of our time researching newer or emerging technologies that would enhance a digital experience in the classroom as well. So it was always ever present, but I don't think it was necessarily a conscious movement that I chose, oh, I have to be involved in tech. It just seemed to happen that it was always there and that it was something that I was extremely interested in. I think today now being led to the AI ecosystem and working as the head of training and education, it was my master's studies. So I studied corpus linguistics, and that is the statistical analysis of language. that was without the computational aspects of looking at it from a natural language perspective. It was more of a sort of statistical analysis of the patterns in language and using different technologies and softwares to analyze identifiable components. So my whole interest in corpus linguistics was one of the reasons why Squirrel were quite interested in my background as well. Squirrel, we focus a lot on natural language processing, text classification in particular. So that marriage came hand in hand coincidentally as well. So I think, there's always been something that's related to me to the emergence in technology.
Wow, what a great story. And after 2,300 interviews, I always ask that question. I'm always fascinated by how people come into the world of technology. And I would say that word you mentioned, curiosity, is the most common answer. People that just question things, wonder how things work, want to look a little bit deeper into things, and it's great to hear your story there too. And it would be that story, that path, that would lead you to Squirro, that is combining human intelligence and powerful AI. But can you tell me more about the company and the problems that it's set out to solve with technology? Because again, it's not replacing education with technology; it's the two working side by side, isn't it? An almost symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, very much so. So if you look at who Squirrel are and the target market that we are addressing, Squirrel is an insight engine organization, and this might be a term per se that our audience are not really familiar with, and we can certainly look at that term in a little bit more detail. And we've been recognized for the past 2 years, so we're Gartner Magic Quadrant Visionary for the Insight Engine. And what we do is we provide augmented intelligence solutions to both private and public institutions that focus on the use of artificial intelligence and its associated technology branches. And as I mentioned, this is primarily natural language processing and machine learning. And the technology itself, so the Insight Engine, is what is at the core. We also have developed corresponding technologies, sort of augmented intelligence apps. But the technology aims to address a variety of data problems, especially really when it comes to unlocking corporate data landscapes and empowering, as we've touched upon, empowering employees with a tool that really eases, how they access data and what kind of data they can access. So the Insight Engine and its applications, they can be used as a core technology in an organization's data infrastructure or their landscape, or really as maybe like an integrated tool in an existing CRM system, like, for example, Salesforce. And we have a lot of use cases or solutions that pertain to the development in the tech field. If we take an example, our solution like business environment monitoring. So we have a business environment monitoring application, and it analyzes data from external, internal, and premium data sources. So you really have this sort of overarching prevailing opportunity to identify patterns, trends, insights in the whole of your data landscape. And the business environment monitoring, it's allowing you to automatically monitor and track more than 100 signals that are related to maybe, for example, potential risks that could happen, sanctions, ESG, board changes across all of your providers or any related companies. So this is the sort of space that we're working in. We're quite popular and successful with financial institutions. A lot of our use case pertain to the application and implementation of an Insight Engine into financial ecosystems.
And when I think about training in the workplace, a lot of people have a bad impression because of the old way of doing things. I'm thinking back to things like compliance training for something like cybersecurity, and everybody in the organization has to do it. Some people will create screenshots of all the answers and send them to everyone where nobody actually learns anything. Is there a realization within the workplace that training needs to be improved right across the enterprise?
I'd say 100%. If we're looking at training and education from a generic angle, and we work back with a lot of the stereotypes that are still in place, as you've just highlighted, and I'm not saying that they don't exist, but there certainly has been a lot of progression in training and education. And I think even now, I'm so excited about the space that we're in at the moment. And we've seen there's a lot of conversation and narratives around the possibility that AI is providing for educational organizations, for the way that we train, and also educational landscapes. If you look at maybe some of the forerunners, I don't want to really mention any educational organization names in our conversation, but there's a lot of innovative forerunners that are taking the opportunity to use tools. Like if we just look at what is mentioned quite a lot at the moment, like ChatGPT, the extensive possibilities that opens up for an organization to really take an innovative approach to training. I mean, the options and scenarios are just, there's no extent. It's really the limitation is your mind and how you can implement these technologies in a positive and safe and ethical manner. So I think that, again, it's about taking the opportunity and also the time to analyze what is possible with the implementation of new technologies and new AI technologies.
100%. I mean, if we go back, just 12 months, really, if you ask the average person outside of the tech industry, what is AI? What value does AI bring to the business? Most people would be scratching their head. They've heard the buzzword, but don't actually know what it is or what it does. And there are that many different definitions for what it is as well. So even people in tech got confused. But I think from the beginning of 2023, ChatGPT has just changed all that. Now people are starting to think, what can we do with this? What if it was in Microsoft Office and all the different permutations? Is that something that you're seeing as well?
100%. I can certainly underline and shadow that. And I think that that's one of the reasons, actually, Neil, why we started, and you can see it, well, the listeners might not be able to see it, but behind me, I've got the logo for Redefining AI. So as part of our educational offering, I initiated Redefining AI because we had seen, with our experience in working in digital transformation, our experience in working in the ecosystem of AI, machine learning, natural language processing, that a huge barrier to entry into a lot of organizations, entry into conversations, was that a lot of people weren't really familiar with the terminology, or there was a familiarity, but there was a lot of ambiguity around what is AI, what is machine learning, how do they differ, what is natural language processing, what is AI useful, how can we implement it into an organization, is it going to bring value to our organization? So with all of this, again, I use the word ambiguity and uncertainty, we launched Redefining AI so that we could provide an avenue for people to really immerse themselves with the terms and all that was happening in the field, and also provide us with an opportunity to challenge current AI definitions and narratives in the space. And I'd say it's proven as quite a successful exercise, because we are seeing that people are much more consciously aware of the terms that are being used. And ChatGPT, going back to your question, has certainly increased awareness and a desire to want to know more about AI and AI technologies.
Of course, this is the time of year where everybody wants to be learning something new. Something happens at the beginning of every new year. But can you tell me more about education in enterprise digital transformation? Because it's such a big topic right now, isn't it?
It is a big topic. And I think the interest in the topic is only going to increase, especially with the intensification that we've just spoken about and the mainstream awareness around digital transformation opportunities. And I think that here what is important is to maybe look at the definition of digitalization when we're talking about digital transformation. And even there's a lot of glossaries, there's a lot of tech glossaries that are ever growing, And at certain times, they hold such slender differences in definition as well. So I tend to fall back personally on a popular, a Gartner definition of digitalization. And that's really about the fact that so it's the use of digital technologies to change a business model and really to provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. It's the process of moving to a digital business, depending on obviously the actual implementation and the use case. There's obviously differentiation there. And I think that I like that definition because it favors, it foregrounds the key aspects and consequences of the process. And it's also very relatable, regardless of the stage that you're at, or as I've mentioned, the type of digitalization that your business is undergoing. And one thing that has really changed as well, Neil, is that digital transformation and the education around it, it's a journey that I think many companies are powering ahead with. And if we look back, I think the dawn of COVID, the pandemic, made digital transformation an even more pressing requirement, in my opinion. And I think that what is important in the education around digital transformation is that companies constantly transform and that they need to keep up with the speed of emerging technologies. So it's about a process of continuous learning, like building a digital mindset and an awareness and encouragement to want to continuously learn to coincide with that progression of the emerging technology landscape, and really the agility to pivot and adapt to an evolving competitive landscape, because that's also something that has to be at the forefront when we're looking at digital transformation. And this has to be understood in the organization as well, that it can only benefit an entire organization if we're aware of the consequences of not being immersed in a willingness to evolve with technology. And I think that in that sense, here we're talking about speed is critical, and digital transformation and the education of these consequences. It does take financial investment, it takes time. And I think that a lot of organizations need to look at planning investments in, technology and organizational capabilities and talent. And also how data, technology, processes, and people are connected. It's not just about the technology. Technology is always about doing more with less, yet the combination, it's only really effective if you pair technology with the right human skills. And that's what the education is about. It's about ensuring that you've got the right human skills, be it upskilling, be it developing a conscious digital mindset. And developing and changing mindset it should never be underestimated. It's a huge task that companies have to undergo as well. If we only think about, behavioral change in a private situation, and I'm not a psychologist, but I have read a lot about behavioral change. And, it's a 4 to 5 step conscious process. And this is about really trying to change habits and organizations that then lead to effective process change as well.
Yeah, so refreshing to hear you say those things as well. And for any business leader that's listening to our conversation today, when should they educate in an enterprise? Is there anything you can expand on around that?
It's a nice question. Yeah. And I think it's a question that should always remain present and in the minds of any leader. Again, successful leadership is about leading by example. So if you're curious and conscious of the fact that you will benefit more from having a growth mindset and a willingness to learn, then this is also something that should be embodied and trickled down through your organization in various formats. Education is, in my opinion, and I'm looking at successful educational efforts and also research that proves, that education should never be at one moment, at one point. there is a necessity depending on the goal or the learning objective that you're aligning an educational effort with, that will encourage you to emphasize or put more emphasis on education. But in general, education should always be an aspect of a successful developing organization. And I think we've seen as well that, having worked with a lot of organizations that are undergoing digital transformation, especially when we look at talking to like chief data officers, there has been an underestimation of the vulnerability and uncertainty that is involved in developing a digital mindset, and not just the skills to use the new technology, but also that they understand that they need to really help this emotional development of a digital mindset, which leads you to a philosophical question of, are we digital beings? It's something that I question myself all the time.
100%. And I'm curious, if let's bring to life a lot of the things that we're talking about here. What's, let's say a business is undergoing a digital transformation. What should their education cover?
So I think it depends on the type of digital transformation that they're undergoing. So if we take an example of maybe the digital transformation that we're familiar with, looking at the implementation of a new AI technology or a new AI tool, if we're looking at the use of maybe cognitive search, so it's a project that we heavily undertake here at Squirtle, then we're looking at, first of all, the behavioural change that's involved in, once you're implementing the technology, how are you going to use the technology? When are you going to use the technology? Why are you going to use this technology? And how are you going to ensure that people understand and learn how it will enhance what they're doing? So this education revolves a lot around how to use the tool. Also a comparative analysis of showing them, how are you using the tools that you were using prior to the new tool? And what is it that you haven't seen about the new tool in your older processes? If we take an example of like query syntax. So when people go to Google, there's maybe, or any other search engine, there's a traditional approach that we take to how we search, because sometimes we don't know about the advanced query syntax options or opportunities that would enhance our search experience. And a lot of larger and smaller providers want to ensure that we can understand this, but sometimes it's not always clear. So even the education around the advanced capabilities of simpler processes or behaviors that we embody on a daily basis.
And I'm curious, as someone that lives and breathes this space, in your experience, what have many leaders failed to educate on when carrying out a digital transformation? Because I suspect that you've got more than a few war stories under your belt throughout the years. But are there any trends or commonalities around what people fail to educate on in the enterprise around digital transformation?
Yeah, I think it would certainly go back to the failure to understand the vulnerability and also the necessity around analysing what behavioural and also, what behavioural processes are involved in the use of the technology. It's really always a failure around trying to understand how a person is involved in the situation and how the person relates to the use of technology.
Fantastic. And you said at the very beginning of our conversation today that you've done a lot of work with various financial institutions. And I know you can't name any, but do you have any use cases from that industry that you can share that would just further bring to life everything we're talking about today?
Yeah. So I think that a popular use case and a successful use case would go back to what I just mentioned around the cognitive search tool that we are implementing in a lot of larger financial institutions. And cognitive search is a tool that enables cognitive computing capabilities. So we're looking at a traditional enterprise setting of a lot of unstructured data sources. So there's data in emails, there's data in customer management systems, there's data in your, Confluence, if you're working with Confluence, there's premium data, maybe if you're working with Bloomberg. There's a lot of data that is in different silos. And the cognitive search tool really ensures that all of that unstructured data can come together and that you can bring out the insights that you need for your daily work through the exposure of a collated data pool.
And like I say, we've talked a lot about other businesses and what they're doing, but what's your big focus this year? We're right at the beginning of 2023. What are you focusing on right now?
Yeah, our big focus. So we're focusing this year. I'd say that my current focus is our show, Redefining AI. I am wholeheartedly dedicated to providing an informative educational channel. And also, I would say, creative exposure to the emerging tech ecosystem and all of the wonders, Neil, that are building and impacting our digital realities. Now, we've mentioned a couple of times when we've been talking that emerging technologies, they're extremely topical. And they do, in my opinion, certainly line current and future empowerment opportunities. And it is important, and that's why we're focusing on it, that people should understand the consequences and benefits of emerging technologies and how they can safely use them. And our podcast, Redefining AI, it creates a lot of exposure, it challenges definitions, it offers education, and it opens up, again, topical, ambiguous, and also quite outdated narratives that are around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and emerging technologies. And it gives them a unique, a poignant avenue to redefine their own understanding. So that's what we're focusing on at the moment, really the lining an opportunity for education.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me today. There's so much going on. I know how busy you are. And I want to see if there's something we can do for you now, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So the question I want to ask is there a person that you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, and why? Because he or she might just be listening to this, and it'd be great to see if we can manifest something together on this episode today.
That would be wonderful. I've actually been looking into manifestation a little bit more in my private life. So I'm a huge believer in manifesting. So yeah, Neil, there are a few, but I'd say that the most protruding in my mind would be Lex Friedman. I've been a fan of his podcast for a while, and I'd love to feature on his list of sample conversations. I think that I've noticed that there's not too many sample conversations with women. Maybe there are, but I've just not seen them. But this is something that I have noticed. And secondly, because he is a great conversationalist. He's very informed about AI, has been exposed to a lot of different mindsets. And yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with him.
Oh, well, we'll put that out into the universe, throw it into the ether. Let's see if we can make something happen there. And you've mentioned your podcast today. So if anybody wants to find out more about the podcast, Squirro, or even contact you or your team, or if Lex is listening, how can he get in touch? What's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, so Redefining AI, it's available on all of the major podcast channels. So you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, anywhere where you want to listen. Or you can, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm available on LinkedIn and Lauren Hawker Zafer, accessible and always open to meeting and talking to new people.
Well, I think we covered so much in a short amount of time there, from education and enterprise digital transformation, when they should educate in an enterprise, and so much more. But I think more than anything, it was your personal origin story and what we're going to try and manifest that meeting together there at the end. Hopefully we can make something happen. But more than anything, just thank you for spending a bit of time with me today and sharing your story.
No, thank you, Neil. Thank you for your efforts and for the wonderful opportunity. It's been an interesting conversation.
So a huge thank you to Lauren for joining me on the podcast today. Apologies if you heard any background noise today. While we were performing the interview, we had a little building work going on, people knocking at the door, a dog barking, had it all going on, but somehow we managed to keep our composure. But on a more serious note, what did you take away from the interview today? Was there anything in particular that resonated with you? Is there anything that you thought we missed that you'd like to come on here and talk about yourself? Or would you just like to ask me a question? Whatever it may be, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. I'd love to keep this conversation going and let me know what you thought and also what you'd like to hear more of on this show. But that's it for today. So just a big thank you for me for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.